I do think that sometimes bad things are born from believing things that aren't real, but as long as you aren't causing problems for other people, then I think it's a good time.
So, knowing now everything about the brain because you're studying psychology, and psychology means you know everything about everything because you know what it is to know, why do you
Oh yeah,
think
oh
that
yeah.
we look for, I guess, a way to identify with something in like the most ridiculous of things, such as, yes, the star was here when I was born?
Oh man, I guess as a good psychologist, I'll preface this by saying, one, this is not my field of study, so I can only speak on this as much as any other normal person can speak on it. But I have like I've taken some great classes. I've had a great time in college so far, and one of the few things that I've learned about like human belief systems and whatnot, specifically pertaining to not psychology, astrology, horoscopes, and whatnot, is that like people see the stars change and the world change around them, kind of in tandem with the stars, right? The rhythm is parallel. Like winter comes and the stars change, and you see the same stars that you saw last time it was cold. Summer comes and it's the same deal, right? The stars that come when it's cold leave, and the stars that come when it's hot come back. Uh, and I think from there people derive much more meaning than they probably should. But how could you blame people way back in the day, right? I definitely can't blame people nowadays because I'm like, dude, come on, we have so much more information available. You're just refusing to educate yourself. But but definitely in the past, like there was no way for them to really understand or know that like uh, the stars had no bearing in like what happened in our day to day lives besides the fact that coincidentally their movements coincided with like seasons and harvests and all that stuff. Um, but I don't know. I think it's kind of arrogant. You know, it's born from human arrogance to believe that we're like at the center of the universe and that everything is like built or created for our purpose to be observed by us. Um, it's just silly to think like the universe is so vast and so broad, and all of it is just so that it can tell us what's going on with your emotions on a Thursday next week.
But because it's so broad, why wouldn't it all be connected? Why wouldn't something have an impact on something else if there's so much that is, I guess, correlated?
Because of Occam's razor, like it's so complicated to think like to think that like all these crazy things have to happen so that like uh you like aren't gonna make good money on the next business dealing that you do, or whatever horoscopes tell you to do. Like I don't know how it works out, but I think it's something like Scorpio, you're gonna get into some business dealings next week, and you should be careful because people are plotting on you. And it's like, no, I promise you that like nebula aren't like moving hundreds of thousands of light years away, so that like you don't mess up on your next business adventure. Uh, but I mean, I also don't know. It's kind of unfair for me to say, oh, all this is wrong when I don't have like an alternative answer. Um, Obviously, there's like scientific hypotheses or theories more than anything, which are not what people think of when they think of theories. There's a lot of um, empirical evidence that backs them up. Um, but again, I don't know. I don't. That's not something that I like to spend a lot of time talking about beyond like the sociological aspect of it, because I think that that's cool. Like people's beliefs in these kinds of concepts, ideas, they shape our societies, right? And they impact the way people are treated, the way some people are marginalized versus other people who are upheld as like the standard. Um, but when it comes to like cosmologically how they affect the stars and the universe in a broader sense, like uh, I don't know. I'm not with it in that regard. But that again, that's not my field of expertise. So I feel like it's not a great thing to for me to really speak on.
I mean,
I
all
feel
I
like
did
it's
was ask
more
if you
stuff.
remembered the questions that we asked at the beginning
Yeah.
of the show. But go off, King.
Listen, listen. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway,
Anyway, I
that's
would
my
just
take
like to
on
make one more
astrology.
comment on astrology because, well, in chat I saw Josh says, "What if the light emitted from the stars actually has an impact on the kind of energy you absorb when born?" And I know nothing about science, so I can't comment on that one. I just thought it was an interesting perspective.
Wait, let me see. Oh shit, Sec Major Gang. I have not been keeping up with the chat. Oh my god. I hate that there's a 15-second or whatever delay um on the stream because I just pulled up the chat and saw my face doing like the grossest thing.
Yes, last week whenever I had
Uh,
Fern on here, I did a different thing because I've been messing around because there's a bunch of new stuff in the studio, and of course I have a new computer, so now I'm like out here just playing around with things. But I was doing this right here from Twitch how I usually do, but I was grabbing the audio from the streamer, which has an 8-second delay, the video that streams on YouTube from this camera if you're watching on Wex FM, that camera if you are watching the stream. Uh, the video feed has like a
you
35-second
can watch on
delay.
Wex FM
Yeah, Wex FM has video feed now, but
a
it's
video.
again it's on a different delay. So like the station's on an 8-second delay on air. Online it's like 12-ish seconds, and the video's like 30 seconds. So it's fully out of sync. But we've been messing around with it, trying to shorten it. But work in progress. Anyway, Fern said that
Anyway,
it was like
so
bizarre
I'm
to
reading
see
the
that.
chat. I wanna engage with chat because chat is very intelligent or pretty cool. Um, and I want to say shout out to Macro, whoever you are, had the courage to say astrology is a pseudoscience. And yeah, correlation and causation are different. Just because something is correlated doesn't mean they cause one another. I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that psych knowledge into this conversation. I don't like to go hard on people's like belief systems because one, people are really defensive about them, and two, like I want to embrace the fact that I don't know. You know, I know that there's a lot of like really aggro atheists who are like, man, fuck God, God's not real, blah blah blah. And it's like, no, man, like I just don't know. You know, but what I do know is that like I'm not gonna follow something if there isn't like good concrete empirical evidence behind it. And astrology just isn't one of those things, you know. So I can't really back that up. Just like I can't back up any major religions. And so the most I can really say about them is if the people who believe in them and want to engage in them are not harming others and like not creating problems for society, let them do it. In some ways, there are tangential like problems that arise, especially when you think about their children and the way they raise their children and the way sometimes they harm their children with like beliefs that aren't grounded in reality. Then yeah, sometimes it's irresponsible of me to say that, but I just don't have a better answer than if you're not actively hurting someone, do whatever you want.
That's a beautiful takeaway, Rafael. But my question then becomes, since we've spent 15 minutes talking about something you hate talking about, what is it that you do enjoy dedicating your time and interest in within psychology?
I'll talk about my research. I love psychology in general as a field. There's so many interesting aspects of psychology. I think it's so much more than what people imagine psychology to be. I'm so far removed from the psychology that people think of when they think psychology, which is like more so clinical and counseling psychology. Right now, I'm doing research. My research is focused on primarily aggression and like mediators and predictors of aggression. So what I'm looking at specifically in the study that I'm designing right now, I just submitted funding applications. I submitted one to the faculty funding application and one to the undergraduate research application. But it's on how virtual nature impacts aggression, and then I'm measuring a bunch of other variables too, like mood and like affect, which is mood, positive and negative affect, and also presence, like how people feel immersed in this virtual reality space, right? And so essentially, what my research is going to be doing is I'm getting funding for a virtual reality headset, like head mounted display, and I have access to the psychology lab at my college in the science building, and I'm going to put people into this experiment. And I don't want to say too much, I guess. I don't think anybody who's going to participate in it is going to watch this, but not to say that you don't have like incredible reach or anything, but no, didn't mean to offend you. But so I'll speak somewhat liberally about it. Essentially, what I'm doing is like having people come in, measuring their baseline levels of aggression and other measures, and then inducing aggression, and then putting them into a virtual simulation of nature, either an artist rendered simulation of nature or a 360-degree video recording of actual nature. And then I have a control condition. But essentially, I'm trying to see if there's lots of great research that talks about how, like, if you're in normal nature, you get a lot of benefits, like not just mood benefits, but actual physiological benefits. Like if you're just done with a surgery, you actually recover a lot faster if you spend time in nature. And then there's more research that's more relatively newer, that's looking at the fact that you can actually replicate that with virtual representations of nature. So like even 2D screen nature is good for you, but the more immersive it is, the more presence you feel, the stronger those effects, right? And so virtual reality gives us an excellent kind of excellent opportunity to present the closest we can to real nature for people who don't have normal access to nature. So like if you can think about disabled people or people in prisons or low-income people in inner cities who don't have the time, money, or transportation access to travel 2-3 hours to a naturescape, right? And not to say that virtual reality headsets or things like that aren't expensive, but as a program, like if the state or the city wanted to do something to like decrease crime rates or something like that, they could definitely set up VR headsets in like a public library or something and give kids access to this, which would theoretically, if our findings are in line with like the literature review that I've done, reduce levels of aggression, and by that also like because it's a mediator aggression for crime rates, right? And other like really negative things. So it's super cool. I think it's really interesting. I'm excited to actually do the research. But besides that stuff, so that's kind of like a mix between cognitive and social, which is where I'm headed, I think, towards grad school, like a cognitive social psychology perspective. Last semester, I did research that was more specifically cognitive, and by more specifically, I mean it was 100% cognitive. I watch videos, as a lot of people, at least younger people that I've talked to, do as well. I watch videos at 2 times speed. It just like it seems so much more effective to me. It saves me time. Blah blah blah. Anyway, I was doing my literature review, and apparently it's not good necessarily to watch videos at double speed. Self-report measures of it, people's confidence is really high. They're like, oh yeah, I understood everything. I feel great. But when you test them on it, it's fucking shit. Like people don't remember anything. It's like it's so bad if you watch videos at double speed. But research up until recently had been ignoring the fact that like if you watch a 10-minute video one time at normal speed, you spend 10 minutes watching it, right? Or you could spend those same 10 minutes watching a 10-minute video twice at double speed. And there's really good research that supports the finding that multiple exposures to the same material is really beneficial for your long-term learning. And so what I did was I put people in different categories of like variable playback speeds for videos, and then I tested them on it. I tested them on it right immediately after they watched one of the videos, and then the other video I gave them a 24-hour delay, and then I tested them again. And everything is what you would expect, right? The people who watched it at double speed did really bad on the immediate test, and etc. But the one really interesting finding in that study, which wasn't statistically significant, unfortunately, but that's because like, especially undergraduate studies, they tend to be really low powered. And so even if the data suggests one thing, especially your descriptive statistics, if they suggest one thing, it's likely that you didn't find statistical significance because you just didn't have enough participants. And that's kind of what happened to me. But what's important for the viewers, the listeners, anybody who's really like behind watching videos at 2 times speed is that if you watch a video 2 times at 2 times speed, those people, when I tested them 24 hours later, their scores were like through the roof. It was crazy because I guess the trend was like as the speed increased, the scores dropped for both conditions, like the immediate and the 24 hours later. Except for the people who watched it twice, their scores were like better than the people who watched it at normal speed, or even I had some people watching it at slower speed to just like check that out, see if that did anything. It doesn't do anything. Don't watch videos at slower speed. It's a waste of your time. But I think like that kind of research is really interesting. I mean, it in a day and age when like we do so many things with technology, so much of lecture content and everything over the pandemic was asynchronous and online, and people were watching things at 2, 3, 4 times speed. I know I was watching some of my core class lectures at 4 times speed because I was like, I don't have time for this. And I mean, I did pretty well in the class, but that was because the class was easy, not because 4 times speed was
So
okay.
I have a question then, because I have seen something similar, but it's interesting that you said that the people who've watched it twice, managed to retain the information better regardless, right? Is that, do you think, because whenever you listen to it, you listen for different parts of it? Like, why is it? Or is it just kind of like, repetition leads to memorization?
The people who watched it twice, I'm entering a comment by Macro, and I was going to type it, but I can answer it now and then also answer your question. So the people who watched it at normal speed only watched it 1 time. Think of it this way: it's like they're equivalent in the amount of time invested in learning, right? So like you're going to invest 10 minutes anyway. That gives you real world generalizability and validity. So whether you watch one video in 10 minutes 1 time or you watch that same video in 10 minutes twice, that's really what you want to compare. Because if you're watching one video twice in 20 minutes at normal speed, then you're already making this huge investment that like most people probably don't have time for, and it's not it doesn't have real world validity as much as like the comparison that I was making. And the people who watched it twice at double speed, they scored much better than anybody else. In specifically, to be clear, in the 24-hour delay condition, which was actually really interesting. They did poorly in the immediate test condition, and I think that was just like a result of like being barraged with so much information so quickly. But it just stayed in their heads for so much longer because they watched it twice as 2 times, and like especially sleep. Sleep is so sorry. Sleep. There's research that says that sleep is when you're like encoding and all that stuff happens, and you can recall things better if you do have a night's sleep before you get tested on something, especially if you're exposed to something twice. And so like that's where the discrepancy was, and it's a discrepancy that wasn't expected, and I think it was really interesting.
In chat, Mac also mentions that a professor said that you absorb 10% of whatever it is that you're learning when you learn something new. So hypothetically, 10 times is how much you'd have to like relearn said thing until you fully knew it. Do you know if this is true?
I honestly, I don't know. I haven't heard of that research, but it makes sense. I mean, like, I'm always worried about hearing like statistical figures being thrown out, especially when they're so clean, like 10%. But it makes sense that like we're exposed to so much all the time, right? And your brain has to attenuate, and it's not feasible for our brain to capture 100% of everything that we're exposed to all the time, every day. So yeah, it just makes sense for your brain to delete most of everything. I mean, if you think about like saccades, how they happen, right? When you look at one thing and then you move to looking at something else, your brain does that with your eyes because it just doesn't make sense to store all that information that you're not focusing on. You're primarily thinking, I want to look over here, now I want to look over there. Everything that I saw from here, like in between that space, I'm just going to delete it. And you can imagine that attention would be somewhat similar in the sense that like, I'm paying attention to this one thing. It stood out to me. It was salient. It's important. I'm going to save it. And then a bunch of other stuff comes through to you. And until something else really like is salient to you and registers, most of the other stuff, I get why it would get like thrown out. So the absorbing 10% of the knowledge makes sense. I like that they said hypothetically watching it 10 times you would know it all. That's really it's a funny like question because it like 10%, 10%, 10%.
But you're not guaranteed
like,
which percent of it is you're learning. Yeah, like you just remember the intro song and that's it.
Exactly, you remember it really, really well. It the other thing I wanted to say about that is that it's a great question because it's actually something we can test. Like we can put people in a lab, have them watch a video 10 times, and see if they remember the whole video better than somebody else, right? And they probably would. I don't have a doubt. Like if I were to set up a hypothesis for that, I would say, yeah, somebody watching a video 10 times would probably remember it much better than somebody else who didn't watch it 10 times.
Out of personal curiosity, do you know how this applies to people with a photographic memory? I don't know what you study. Like, that's why, like, now I'm just like, everything that I've ever wanted to know about the brain, this is the hour to ask it in.
Photographic memories are really interesting. Talking about podcasts, we're on a podcast, but like, I listen to a bunch of psychology podcasts, like so many psychology podcasts, it's insane. There's one, I feel like the same woman was like interviewed in 2 different podcasts. But she talks about her memory. She's got like incredible memory. She can tell you, like you can give her a date, right? Say like March 14th, 1998, right? And she can tell you what she was doing on that day, like with who and how it went down, everything, little details, right? And it just so happens that my mentor, who is the executive director for the organization I used to work for, she's got the same kind of memory. And because of her, I kind of started doing a little bit of research into that phenomena. And it's actually a tangent of synesthesia, right? You know how people can like smell colors and taste letters and hear
synesthesia was
numbers.
My final project to Psych 101 or whatever the course was for intro psychology.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there's those people. Some people have a spatial awareness of time. And I've had conversations with my mentor, and she's told me like her perspective of time, and this is actually something that like other people with the same kind of not condition, but the same, I mean, gift really is what I would call it. How they describe it, where she says it's like a vault of memories that shapes out kind of like an S, and she can expand it, like zoom in basically, and pull it open and pull things out. And that's really interesting. Another thing that's really interesting is the way that the pandemic has affected those people and their memories, because then now we don't have like clean divisions between like when one thing was happening and another thing is happening. And I know for a fact that some people are doing research on that right now, but it's honestly a blessing that I know somebody like that and have access to like asking them cool questions about their memory, because doesn't everybody want to have that kind of memory, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah, I was going to say, Eden had a question about applied behavioral analysis.
Behavioral analysis, points on both sides. So I am not a behaviorist.
Can you define it first?
No, it's what I'm saying. Like I'm not a behaviorist, but I think there's a lot of good stuff to be taken from uh, behavioral psychology specifically. Uh, like I'm very cognitive in the way that I think about psychological questions and the way that I approach them, right? And so, like behaviorists, whether it's like the practical applied aspect of it, and I think that that's the big debate in that field. If I'm not wrong, uh, it's like people who theorize versus like people who theorize behavioral like psychological concepts versus people who like uh, are more focused on how the application of behaviorist principles um, changes or like can be used to change like the people's behavior. I don't know how else to say that in a better way. Anyway, like my field of interest specifically and what I've done the most reading on is not so much the outcomes, but the underlying mechanisms of what people are thinking or feeling or like what kinds of things are going through their head when they're doing something or like learning something or engaging in some kind of behavior. And I know that primarily behaviorists, because they view the brain as kind of like this black box. Their focus is not on the underlying mechanisms or thought processes. Their focus is on like the outcomes and like how can we change the outcomes. Um, so I would not be the correct person to ask uh, about like the debate between people who are for or against ABA. To be honest.
Well, thank you for your candor. I did want to mention about your research earlier. It's interesting that you are using VR in like a positive, like this is helping the world type of way. When I feel like we grew up with the concept of like technology is ruining our minds and we're gonna die because of it. Because even if it's not because of the content, right? We've all heard like video games create violence, etc. But like there's also like the argument that like humans weren't no real living creature was ever meant to like just consistently stare at like flashing blue light, you know? So like
Yeah.
you're literally
Okay.
the one that's out here being like, dog, like we're gonna make the flashing blue light look like a tree and that's gonna
Pretty
help
good.
you.
Yeah. Oh my God, I have so many thoughts about that. So one thing I just want to clarify really quickly for anyone who's listening who still believes kind of like that myth that was born from earlier psychological studies that had really bad like methodologies is that video games cause violence or something like that. Those studies have been replicated recently, actually, and I I'm not a defender of like Grand Theft Auto and like murder games and all that shit. Like I don't play video games. I hate to say it. Karla invited me to play Valorant, and I don't have time, so I don't play video games. Unfortunately, I think video games are fun and cool and like really entertaining, but I just don't have time to do it. It's weird to me that I got into the VR, like the studies of VR. Um, because it's not something that I'm like really involved in. I love technology in the first place, but it's not the kind of tech that I'm usually looking at. You know, over the summer I was working on like EEGs of memory in individuals with autism, right? So I'm usually working with like MRIs or EEG machines or something like that. But this became really interesting to me. Anyway, video games are not necessarily bad. There's also research that had come out about how like social media is like the worst thing in the world for you, and now there's new research that's like come to realize that no, it's not social media that's bad for you. People were making like psychology 101 mistakes about that. Like correlation equals causation. No, there are the reason why that correlation exists is because a lot of people with really poor mental health like situations or circumstances are engaging with social media in negative ways, and that's what's causing like even worse situations for them. But social media in and of itself is not unhealthy. It's actually a great way to connect with the people that you care about and love. You just have to be intelligent about the way that you use it, just in the same way that like I don't know, you got to be careful about the food that you eat, right? Like you can have an unhealthy relationship with food. That doesn't mean that food is bad. And there are people who are predisposed to having unhealthy relationships with food, and that can become a problem. But like you it's not the object in and of itself that's evil or something. I do acknowledge that like there is some kind of desensitization that happens with like violent video games and whatnot, with especially with smaller kids, and it's crazy that all these little kids are playing these games, but just the research doesn't back up the idea that like video games make you violent. It's not true. Um, More so, it could be said that like violent people like playing violent video games.
I was gonna
Uh,
say, I think it goes the opposite way. Like some people have a certain ideology, I guess, and they seek out violence, not like in real life, but also in video games. But it's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Like
yeah.
so for example, Valorant was the one that I brought up to you because yes, you do play video games. How many times did I walk into your spot and see you playing your freaking
Chess?
Roman Emperor nonsense?
What are you talking about?
Dude, that freaking game that you had that you played like for months on end where you're out here like I don't know, it was like people with spears and bows and arrows and horses.
What are you
Like you're do
talking
you
about?
oh my god, you cannot be serious. You found like a old version of a game that you used to like and you pulled it up on because you had your two laptops, right? You had one laptop that was dedicated specifically to this game. You gotta know what I'm talking about. Ask Fio. Fio, you guys know Fio.
No.
I've mentioned Fio a million times. You know exactly what I'm talking
Oh, speaking of you're crazy, are we ever gonna talk about gaslighting?
about. We'll talk about
I feel like
gaslighting in
there
a
was
second. I just
more.
wanted to mention,
I
for
feel like
example, like
there was a second point to one of your questions that like I brought up something really interesting in my head, but I think I've forgotten since. uh, we'll let chat figure it out for us. But meanwhile, we'll also
hello,
read chat.
Fern. Fern just said gang gang. Fern was on the show last week.
Wait, this one I'm just curious about to hear what other people think about ABA. People are either completely for it and say it's amazing, and then there are people who are really against it and say it's abuse. Thank you for answering my question, and it's a lot to be done. Um, in that line of things, I think my perspective is like when people feel so strongly about some aspect of psychology, um, I think everyone should be careful, both the people who are for it and the people who are against it. Psychology suffers from this concept where like findings are oversold and then like trivialized, and people peddle them as like panaceas, right? So I think the people who are really for ABA, if they're treating it like a panacea, like a cure-all, they need to be careful, because I don't think any school of psychological thought has all the answers for every like problem, right? And then I also want to say that like if there's people out there who are saying that it's abuse, um, you have to really think about what constitutes abuse too, because Karla and I were talking before the podcast, like how misused a lot of times psychological terms and concepts are. And while I am like a big supporter of the idea that we should let people have as much access to psychological concepts and findings as possible, I do recognize that there's a detriment to like people being exposed to science without the background knowledge necessary to be truly informed consumers of science. So if you think about like the way people responded to the whole mask thing, at some point they were saying like, don't buy masks, don't use masks, because they were worried that we would like overwhelm mask suppliers and hospitals needed them. And then they were like, okay, now you need to wear a mask. And people were like, oh my God, you backtracked, you changed, like something's different. You lie, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, no, it's just science. Like that's how science works. And people have innate misunderstanding of how science is supposed to work. And so like if you just make articles available to all people always, all the time, somebody's gonna read an article that was written for the eyes of like somebody who has like at least surface level understanding of psychology and statistics, and they're not going to have that, and they're going to misunderstand what it says, misconstrue what the findings mean for themselves, for their personal lives, and for other people, and then spread that. And I think that can be dangerous. I think a good model that would work out really well is like, because it's not good to have published articles be made available immediately to the public, because sometimes those published articles a year or two later, like new research comes out and says like, oh no, that was wrong actually. And people have uncomfortable response to that. Like people don't like to hear science correcting itself, all even though that's what science is. Like
I
science is
mean, yeah,
self-correcting.
exactly.
Uh,
And much like anything, you need context for the science as it's changing.
I think a good model would be like make paid articles paid so that institutions can pay for them and researchers can look at them through the payments of their institutions for like 3 years, and then after 3 years open the copyright so that they can be accessible by people in general. And then like if in those 3 years any new findings have come up that like uh, that serve as corrections for the original article, include those with the article so that anybody who's like looking at them says like, hey, this is not good, this is a problem, or like I can't take this at its face because it's still something that is being questioned. Um, I don't know. There's probably better ways to do it, but I think
No,
that
I
that
mean,
would
and you're
be
right. We've
healthy.
talked a little bit about this before. Actually, not last time, the time before that you were on the show, we talked about academia and how there's a lot of gatekeeping whenever it comes to things like this because there's a paywall behind it. And it's
Yeah, yeah,
unfortunate because even if you're not necessarily in school for something, that doesn't mean that you're ignorant or that you wouldn't have the context because that's why you're looking up these articles. It's because you want the context to know what you're talking about and so that you can talk on something like knowing the right terms for it, not just being like, well, like I know the general concept, but I don't know how to explain it. Because whenever you do that, you sound like you don't know what you're talking about, which is unfortunate because what a lot of people are lacking is the vocabulary and like the right, I guess, resources to like reference.
yeah. I think so, and I think it. Uh, as much as like people who know better can curate those resources before they make it to the hands of people who don't know better, uh, I think that that's a good thing. Uh, but I do think at some point, eventually, yeah, all the information should be made available to people, to all people, because I mean, how are we going to make policy decisions when the only people reading uh, psychological papers about what increases or decreases like crime and poverty rates are psychologists and sociologists? Like, no, we're not the only people who vote. Like other people vote too, and they need to understand the science behind the things that they're voting for or against.
At its core, it is science that explains pretty much everything and not astrology, I will admit.
I mean, and it's like it's not like science says like I can and will explain everything. It's just that science asks, why does that work? How does that work? And that's what explains everything. Is the pursuit of the understanding of why something works
I mean,
or how it works.
at its core, it's because an attempt is being made.
Yeah, yeah, with some degree of rigor. Oh, somebody's on the Discord,
Oh, I
right?
believe Fern
What?
is trying to join, but I
Oh,
don't know how that's gonna work.
alright.
Fern, if you would like to join the conversation, you can join one of the channels and I'll drag you into the live if you truly would like to make a reappearance on the show.
I
Um,
love it.
what was I going to say? Oh, on the topic of before, when you've mentioned a few things that I wanted to kind of try to tie together into a segue because that is my thrill during the podcast. You mentioned gaslighting. We mentioned gatekeeping. How do you feel about girl bossing?
Oh God, thank you so much for this question, bro. At the risk of being called a class reductionist, uh, I was actually just talking to my mentor about this, about uh, the bane of my existence being like these bourgeois members of our marginalized communities utilizing their identities as marginalized people to become exploiters within the confines of capitalism and and like use their identity as a shield against critique, right? And it's true whether you're an undocumented capitalist or a black capitalist or a woman capitalist. If you're exploiting people for their labor value and like you're an asshole, like you're a terrible person, uh, And I don't care what identities you find yourself under. If you're hurting people, you're hurting people, and whoever you are doesn't matter. Like, right? Like your identity doesn't mean you can't be an asshole. Um, and in that same vein, like, oh, oh, something's going on, or is that me? I think I got an email and I thought something was going on in the Discord.
No, it's just you being an upstanding member of society that gets communications via email at 11 on a Sunday.
55. What the? Oh my God, people! I'm not left alone. I will say that. But anyway,
This is
yeah,
truly
so
the grind don't stop, bro.
my perspective on girl bosses is that like it's white capitalist feminism, you know, and it's f***ed up, and it's like I don't think we should glorify girl bosses. Paulo Freire has a great quote that says something along the lines of I'm gonna Google it. Yeah. See, the oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, tend themselves to become oppressors. And that's like the dream, right? The dream of the oppressed.
Or
It's not Paulo Freire, my bad. Agnes de Mille. Uh, when education is not liberating, the dream of the oppressed is to become the oppressor. And that's what happens with girl boss white feminist capitalism. I mean, capitalist feminism, or any other kind of like movement that's been co-opted by capitalism and by the government. Is that like instead of people recognizing like the root of the problems that we've all been facing, their dream is to become some kind of multi-billionaire. And they think that in that way they're going to end up helping their community, and not realizing that like the path to becoming a multi-billionaire means de facto you're going to be hurting tons of people. Most likely your community is included in that list of tons of people. And instead of being so fucking arrogant and thinking that you as an individual can like become a billionaire and solve all of your people's problems, realize that like liberation is a collective movement, and that like you can function as a part of mutual aid and help in the liberation of yourself and your loved ones and your community members, without having to like see yourself in this like bullshit light as some kind of hero that's gonna like uplift all the forsaken people of the world.
yeah, that's the word that you'd used before. I was trying to remember. I didn't want to say selfish because I'm like, that wasn't from this conversation. That was from another topic in a previous podcast. But arrogant is, I think, a good way to put it, because you're right. You do have a lot of people like, man, we're almost out of time unless you want to turn it into a 2-hour. You want to turn this into a 2-hour special?
I mean, I'm good with that, yeah. It's like the idea is like...
But
like,
hold on. I wanted to ask you about
understand.
an example in particular. Because you mentioned like the notion of either people asking one billionaire like, yo, fix the problem, or people wanting to be the billionaire being asked to fix the problem. And I wanted to mention, because we didn't really get to discuss it, Elon Musk being like, all right, tell me, United Nations, how to fix world hunger, and you can have the money. Tell me the plan and you can have the money.
Bro, like, honestly, Elon Musk, he's so stupid. And, like, that's the big problem with, like, the facade, really, of philanthropy in this country. Is, like, wealthy people pretending to give to the poor, like, oh, here you go. Some sprinkling of, like, a fraction of a percentage of, like, their monthly income that is incredibly life-changing to all of us, but when you really think about it, is insignificant to them. It's like me throwing pennies at homeless people and like laughing, and them being grateful and like scraping around on the floor, and then somebody saying like, hey man, don't throw pennies at me, you asshole, and somebody else telling them like, hey man, be respectful, like they're being nice, they're being kind. Like, no, that we don't owe rich people any kind of respect or kindness. They literally have made their billions off of exploiting and harming other people. They're thieves and leeches.
Strong words. I mean, I don't fully disagree, right? Like, on the one hand, I don't give me that look. We've had this talk before. We differ on how far we lean into certain topics, but I do believe that, you can't really get to the top, to that point of wealth, to that point of stature, grandeur, success, without having to have stepped over somebody to get there, right? And once you're there, if it's about retaining that status or being
Not
petty
stepping over
about it,
somebody, stepping
like,
on somebody.
well, yeah, sure. But like, to me, like, with the Elon Musk situation, right? My personal, like, we've heard your opinion. Again, I said I don't fully disagree, right? But my perspective is, was his question out of line? Maybe, but was he wrong? Not entirely, because you can give somebody the money, but that's not guaranteed that they'll know how to manage it, how to use it, or that it will even be used for its original intended purpose. Is he a dick for it? Yeah, of course. Like, bro, just give people the money and let them figure it out, because why do you need to be that savior, like you said? Like, what is with this hero complex where people are like, I will do everything, but prove that you know how to do it? Like, bro, shut up. Just give the money to somebody, Like, it's collective. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, one, just give the money. Two, it's like, if you weren't playing your game, your little game of capitalism where you extracted all of these resources and this value from a bunch of countries throughout the global south, like, they wouldn't be in the situations that they're in right now anyway in the first place, right? And I'm not saying like Elon Musk is solely responsible for all of the impacts of imperialism, but he's a part of like that aspect of the system. And the fact that billionaires exist in the first place, the fact that income inequality is so fucking vast in the first place, not just within the confines of the United States, but even more so when you compare it like globally, how some people make a fucking like $2 a month, and like, what? That's insane. That somebody, like, people need to recognize that that's just crazy, and it's not okay, and it's not about like these people giving away their money, like, because by that time it's too late. People have already died. People have already been exploited. Kids have already died in mines and making cell phones, and tons of people have gotten poisoned by all kinds of chemicals and all that stuff. It's like, at the core, the way we function as a society, as a world, that's what needs to change.
That was a very well said statement. I'm going to interrupt you for approximately 5 minutes. We'll run another song if you'd like to introduce it, and a couple of ads so that we can, lean into the next hour without getting shut down by the FCC. So what are we listening to?
It's called No Es Pa' Mi by Karim Leon. But let me look for it before you play it, because I want to hear it on my end too.
If you'd like to listen, you can do so on WECSFM.com. If you're already listening to WECS 90.1 FM, hi, thank you, listeners. Please consider watching on Twitch at twitch.tv/CarlyGirl. Girl has 2 eyes. Anyway, here is Que es pa' mí, Karim Leon.
Anyway, so girl bossing, not great. I guess it's better than boy bossing. That shit is whack. I'm tired of that. But that doesn't mean I necessarily want to move to... I'm tired of being exploited by white men. I want to be exploited by white women. Yeah, I don't want to be exploited in general. Anyway, I forget I'm not supposed to swear. Now I see you. I hadn't noticed it. Now I see you like
the little button. I'm gonna add another camera angle just so that you can see the bump.
So you can hear all the good stuff. I'm just kidding.
This is a good point. If you want the no filter version, of the show, that's a good point. You can listen to it on Twitch as well as Wex, not instead, as well.
Play Wex on mute in the background so we can have more views.
I mean, the perks of Wex is that you do get clean, beautiful audio from our studio mics instead of my webcam mic.
I mean, except for the fact that like my audio is streaming into Discord and going towards the um, Twitch. So my audio is better on Twitch, right, than on Wex because you're recording my audio out of the computer, like speakers
Yes, because
through a
I still
microphone.
to this day cannot
Okay.
figure out why my laptop will not let me feed it like into
See,
the board. I
this is
can
why I don't even have to worry about my participants listening to your podcast. I'm just I'm just kidding.
That is so rude and uncalled for. Listen, I don't. It's literally just like things like Discord that are like a call. Like I've tried Discord, Duo, Teams, everything. Those are the only apps that won't stream through it because if I play YouTube or Spotify on my computer, like and feed it through the regular aux cord that everyone uses, that streams. It just will not stream like calls. And I wonder if that's like a failsafe of like individual apps or programs, but I don't know enough to know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying? Like I know that I know
Why
things, I don't
if
know
YouTube
this.
works, why don't you set up your YouTube channel and stream both from Twitch and YouTube at the same time? And
Be
then what?
because I'm a Twitch affiliate and that is illegal. There's a
Oh, it's illegal? I
24-hour
didn't know that.
exclusivity period for Twitch, so anything that I do on Twitch can only exist here for 24 hours after it's streamed. So I can't dual stream to here and YouTube. I could. They would tell me to stop though, or they would stop paying me.
Dang. Wait, how do you become a Twitch affiliate?
There's like a
In
list of requirements. You need like a certain amount of followers, stream for a certain amount of hours, for a certain amount of days, be in good standing, don't have like DMCA strikes. Like you can yeah, you can do it. Like anyone can get to that point like by meeting the requirements. Partnership you have to apply for and then they have to like approve it. So like that's the one
oh, a
that's harder to
partner.
get. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, I was gonna say leave it to the psychology major to turn the Twitch stream about into a stream about you.
Yo, he tried to flip it up on me. That's crazy.
No, but where were we? Oh yes. Girl bosses, not good. Marginally as bad as maybe not so much, but terrible, still terrible as bull bosses. Um, Gatekeeping. I didn't even think about gatekeeping.
You mentioned it
And
though
like,
with like how education is restricted to certain parties.
yeah, actually I did, huh? And like I think that in that sense, gatekeeping isn't terrible. Also, I think in the sense of like creating safe spaces. Sorry, I keep burping. For people like marginalized people or anybody else who's like in a protected category, like it doesn't it makes sense to gatekeep in that regard as well. Although, as I often like to point out, skin folk ain't always kinfolk, right? So like just because somebody's a member of your marginalized group doesn't mean everything's going to be swell and smooth in that space. But I do think that if people in marginalized groups want to have a space that's only for them, it's not wrong for them to ask that. And in that sense, yeah, okay, fucking gatekeep away. I feel that, yes. Um, I think people a lot of times get a little kind of aggro about gatekeeping and that it becomes harmful or toxic or like rude. But I mean, what can you say? And the last one, gaslighting. I have much more to say about that. I guess because um, it to me it like touches on a big problem that I have with like pop psychology and the armchair psychologists. Um, and I think like it's something that within psychology circles I think is mentioned a lot more than outside of them. But within psychology circles, people a lot of times talk about how like other fields don't get as much people trying to like say, oh no, I know this, I know this. Don't tell me anything about it because I know. Like people, and I know that like it's not as clear right now when like epidemiologists are like, yeah, the virus is bad, and other people are like, no, it doesn't exist. I did my research. uh, but that's just right now in this moment, you know. Like engineers don't get that shit. Like people are just like, oh, I can't put more than 1,000 pounds on this. Oh, okay, good. Um, like other people, just like lawyers, and like, oh, I can't do that. Okay, that makes sense. Um, and I know that that's not necessarily true. There's always some kind of asshole who thinks they know more than anybody else. Hey, Jordy. I don't know who that is, but glad to see you in the chat. uh, anyway, they I think people have this innate sensation that, like, because they've lived their lives and they know their brain and they know people around them, they're like, yeah, I understand people and the way they think, and I understand the way I think. And like, no, you can't tell me anything about that because I'm an expert in this. Okay. I think there's always somebody who, like, is so arrogant to think that they know. I mean, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like, there's people who don't know shit think that they know so much. But it happens so much in psychology. And the worst part is that, like, people pick up psychological phrases or lingo or like terms that have actual meaning. They have significance, right? We use them in studies and like have findings, and those findings are important. And it's important that the phrase means what it means and isn't divorced from its meaning or like muddled by popular society into meaning something else, because those findings have an effect on people's well-being, people's like lives, etc., right? And so, I mean, people talk about it all the time, how like everybody, like college kids like to say like, oh, I'm so OCD about this thing, or like, oh, blah blah blah, you're so psycho. It's like, no, first of all, psycho is not a diagnosis. And like even then, back in the day, I remember the people used to say like, oh, something, so psycho this, psycho that. And then somebody who took Psychology 101 was like, oh, actually, psychopathy isn't an actual diagnosis. Like, what you mean to say is narcissism. I learned that in Psych 101. And then, like, all the armchair psychologists were like, they were like, oh, yeah, narcissist. And now everyone's mom and cousin and like, ex-best friend is a narcissist. And it's like, no, they're not a narcissist. They're just a person, and maybe they're an asshole, but like, they're not a narcissist.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to see words co-opted by for whatever purpose, right? Currently, my grievances are kind of like you said, people who take Psych 101 classes and think they know things. Because, for example, I took Psych 101 and I realized that actually that means that I do not know things, and I like made my peace with it and went on with my day. But now I interact with people on a day-to-day basis that are, like you said, like narcissist or psycho or trauma, like whatever the buzzwords are. And a lot of it, like, oh, well, how did you come to this conclusion? Oh, well, I saw this TikTok. I hate it. TikTok psychologists are my biggest pet peeve in the world. And I have people like in really close circles to me who I've had this conversation with, right? So like if you happen to be watching this and you're someone that believes in TikTok psychology and I haven't argued with you about it yet, please, this is my call to you. I'm willing to discuss, not argue, I guess, because as the podcast points out, like even Rafael, who I've known for far too long, like we still disagree on stuff and we've still managed to make our peace with it. Anyway, not the point.
I mean, we only disagree because you refuse to be right, but...
We only disagree because you take pride in being wrong out of spite, but whatever. Anyway.
You choose to be wrong every day. You wake up and you're like, I'm going to be wrong about all the things that I refuse to agree with Rafa about.
You wake up and you choose to set aside your belief in the truth and the fact just for the fact of being annoying.
Just to annoy me, Karla. You're like, I'm going to be wrong today. Just because I know it gets on Rafa's nerves.
Anyway, my pet peeve is with people who like claim these things as fact.
I hear so many people like talk about gaslighting and narcissists and OCD and ADHD and ADD and like autism. Like, oh, I'm a little bit autistic, that's fine.
That one I cannot believe has made a comeback, because do you remember in middle school-ish, for us, because we're the same year, middle school-ish being like around 2010, 2011, people would like throw around the word autism like pretty commonly, like sometimes like offensively, but also kind of like, oh bro, you can't say that, like people actually are, like I think I might be a little bit. And like I was like, okay, you do you, boo. Time goes on, it kind of fell out of the common like vocabulary, And now I've seen it make a comeback. And I saw somebody post on their story the other day, yo, I saw this TikTok from somebody that was autistic, and they said that they did this, and that. And like, I do that. And I was like, bro, that doesn't mean anything. Go to the doctor.
Please see a professional. If you're really having doubts and questions about some aspect of your mental health, go see a professional. And if you can, and I totally understand why people don't. Fuck the United States, like mental health system, or even like its healthcare system, ooh, in general, because people won't go to the doctor. But it's like, if you grow a mole on your arm and you think it's cancer, you're not just like, oh yeah, dude, I had cancer now, I just have to deal with it. Like, no, you go get that shit checked out because it's not good, and like,
and for some
you have to
reason,
do something about it.
yeah.
And so if you see that you have these like things, as much as you can, and like coming from an undocumented person who's from a low income family and doesn't have ready access to healthcare or anything like that, and finds it difficult to have some kind of diagnosis or anything. I know there's stigma and everything, but like, you don't make it a part of your quirky personality if that's the case,
Exactly,
really
because
can't.
now it's seen as trendy. Like, for some reason, like, instead of being like, oh, I would like to explain why I am the way that I am, I feel like people see it and they're like, oh, I'm different. Maybe I'm not like other girls. Like, bro, shut up. You literally have like an appointment with like your health service provider that you skipped last week. Like, instead, maybe don't skip that to watch TikTok. Instead of doing that, go speak to the person that actually knows what they're talking about.
Off low-key. But also, like, I know also, like, if you're depressed, depression can make it difficult to do all these kinds of things. All these, and that's what makes it complex. Like, this is not a simple issue where it's like, because a lot of these issues make it difficult to like seek out that help and like kind of engage in the world in what we would deem the correct way, right? But as much as you can, just like don't. My biggest pain is not that people have these problems or think that they have these problems and have a difficult time like getting their diagnosis or actually seeing a professional. It's the fact that like you haven't seen a professional and you've embraced this identity and now you're claiming it as your own without having like concrete proof that like this is what's going on with you, because it could be another thing and you don't know, and it could be damaging to you, and it's also damaging to the people who have it because you're like underplaying it, you're muddling the words, like what they mean, the definition of them, whatever, and like you're representing something to other people who are like, oh, this is what someone with like X problem looks like or sounds like or like engages like, and it's not true, and you're creating a dilemma for people who have this problem. I don't know, there's so much bad that's born from it, and it's like, and I see so many people making it like I said earlier, a part of their personality. It's not supposed to be a part of your personality.
Yeah, and that's actually a good way to tie this into it, because
romanticizing like
exactly the word I was gonna use is it's romanticizing it, because it's kind of what's become the norm. Not romanticizing it, but being open about your mental health status has become the norm, right? So while people, of course, are going to cheer on those who it's like, wow, you're so brave. Thank you for telling me this. Now I know that I can like relate to you on, this level, and that's cool because maybe now I don't feel so alone. Okay, cool. That's not the people that are, the topic of discussion here. It's the people who make it what they are. Like, who they are as a person is what is wrong with them. And people are so much more than that. But the thing is, these people tend to kind of extend it to where if you are doing something and you are interacting with one of these people, they'll be like, hey, have you considered that maybe you have this? Because, like, I think I might have it, and I think you might have it too. Like, bro, like, can you stop?
Like, it's like, stop trying to diagnose people. You're actively causing harm. You're literally applying a placebo effect onto a person. that's, even if they don't have that problem, like, other bad things might stem from it, just from the fact that you like mentioned it and like said this thing that isn't true, or that you have no authority or like expertise or understanding to really be saying this to people.
I mean, I know, and the thing is, it also has like words have power, sure. Yes, this is an established fact, but it's not just mental, right? Like if you keep telling somebody like, "Bro, I think you might have anxiety," like they're going to be like, "Maybe I have anxiety." Like I've been fidgeting with my USB cover this entire time. Does that have to mean anything? No. Does it mean something? I don't know. I'm not the one talking to a psychologist. I'm just fidgeting with a thingy. But anyway, somebody at some point told me something along the lines of, "Yo, I think you have like social anxiety." And I'm like, "You're not a psychologist, so I'm going to keep living my life like the same way I've always lived it because I think I'm managing pretty well." Like maybe sometimes when I go to the restaurant, I am like nervous to go ask for another packet of ketchup when they give me mustard instead, but it's fine. It's not the end of the world and it's not ending my life, so like it's okay. It's an inconvenience because in that moment I didn't want to deal with it, fine. But because like the brain is such a like mysterious, wonderful, powerful, terrifying thing, you have people who like can go to the extreme of that girl Gypsy Rose. Do you remember this story? I think we talked about it at some point, where her mom basically like told her putting a bunch of like different like disorders and disabilities on her to finesse the system and like get perks and get stuff from like Make-A-Wish and stuff like that. And it ended up being that the girl Gypsy Rose didn't actually have like anything wrong with her. It's because her mom had told her for so long, everything is wrong with you and you're sick and you're dying and we need to get all of this stuff. So she was believing that all of this was wrong with her, under a bunch of drugs for stuff that she didn't need. And then when she finally realized like, yo, this is fake, she like freaked out and like made a pact with her boyfriend to kill her mother. But like, not even that, like what's terrifying to me is that because she was told this for so long, like she internalized it and believed it and started exhibiting symptoms of like problems that she didn't actually have.
It's placebo. Yeah. And you're giving people placebo effects. And like, I think I like what you said to that person, and I think that that's how we need to shut people down. It's like, oh, I think you got this going on. It's like, you're not a fucking clinical psychologist. You're not a counseling psychologist. You have no fucking place to be telling me what I have or don't have. Like, how dare you? What audacious kind of bullshit is that to try to tell somebody, like, you have no right to speak on this. What is wrong with you? Like, because it causes genuine harm. And I don't know, like, not only does it cause genuine harm to that person, it causes genuine harm to the field, to all the other people who are suffering from it, etc. And like, it happens too, and I think that's why we were laughing about the whole gaslighting thing, is because like people call everything gaslighting these days. And like, just think, like, if you're a person in an abusive relationship being gaslit and like seriously doubting your sanity, seriously doubting your perception of reality, and like genuinely suffering from like mental health issues that are tangential to like schizoaffective disorder or like some kind of psychosis, because of the degree to which your abuse has like made you question your own perception of reality. And somebody else is like, oh, my roommate is gaslighting me because they like won't put the milk away, and I swear I put it away. It's like,
I mean, it's like,
they're not. Your roommate's not gaslighting you, dog. I swear to God, they either they forgot or you forgot. One of you two forgot, but like, you're not abusers, I promise.
in the same way that it's not gaslighting to tell you that you literally used to play video games in my house and you all of a sudden don't happen to remember what I'm talking about.
Literally, I was thinking of that. I was like, dang.
It was, dude, it's your like, I beat you to it. I swear to God, you used to play it.
I believe that this is true.
Oh my God. I swear to you, there's probably a Snapchat memory in here somewhere of me walking in and seeing you playing this.
This is what I mean, though. Like, I know it's funny, but like, genuinely, a lot of times this happens. Like, we're human beings. Memory is such like, the fact that we take eyewitness testimony is insane in the first place. Anyway, but not to get into all that crazy, because I honestly have to go. I gotta go to sleep. But human memory is fallible. We forget it all the time. It doesn't mean you're gaslighting me because I can't remember. It doesn't mean I'm gaslighting you because I can't remember. Like, we just don't remember. Like, people take this antagonistic, like, perception or whatever, perspective, especially on people who are supposed to be your friends or something. It's like, no.
I would like to point out that Fern in the chat says she remembers it was some Catan nonsense. It was some Age of Empires type, like, BS, bro. Like, I swear to God.
Todd, stop it. No, it wasn't. I believe you guys. Even though I don't remember, I believe you guys.
Open your old laptop and I swear to you, it's still installed.
The shame is real. Anyway, I have to go, but this has been really, really fun. I have a great time every time I come. Have me on next time whenever I'm collecting data for my latest research. I'll come and talk about that. And if anybody has any questions about psychology, I love to like read and do research. So even if it's not within my area of expertise, if you have questions, submit them. I'll look into whatever the answer is to it, and I'll bring something fun to talk about then.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show, Rafael. Thank you everyone that's listened on WECS, everyone that's watched on Twitch, everyone that hung out in chat, and everyone that just happened to like walk past and just kind of vibe as you heard like through the muffled window audio. Thank you so much for being here. This has been Podcast with a K, and I'm your host, Karla with a K, signing off. Tune in next week for new nonsense and new guests. Have a fantastic night.